So the children are very comfortable around all of the adults. They may go to anyone. And then I'm observing everything. And if I notice that a child may be looking for something or it's not out in the environment, then I will come and address that. But the child coming to us is another part of it that I feel many times in myself, in my learning, I would jump to, well, I think I know what somebody wants. And it's very different when we wait for the child. We don't have to wait, but just that allowance of freedom that they come to us.
Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Pamela Green. She's a Montessorian. She's also taken positive discipline, and she's been working with parents and children for over 40 years. I would love for Pamela to do the honor and let us know all the types of work that she has done, and then we'll get into conversations that will help parents and other school leaders or in the classroom, teachers, guides with various questions that come up for us. So Pamela, tell me and tell the audience a little bit about your journey in the last 40 years.
Well, first I want to thank you for inviting me. It's quite a pleasure to be with you, and it's a pleasure to be with all of you that are listening and with us now, as you will be when you hear this. My journey really started in 1981 when I first entered the CASA, or the House of the Child. It was part of my university experience. I was in an elementary education, and our professor for the visit that we went on, he chose to go to this Montessori school. And, it's still pretty common that you get a few paragraphs about Marie Montessori, not a whole lot. So I really only read that. I went to this place, and when I went there, it was like an answering to a call in me. What kind of I knew of myself in knowing children, but I hadn't seen a place like that. I feel that began my initiation, which, we all have initiations, don't we? So I started there, and I became head of school there at that school. I was there from 1981 till 2013. I'm also a Montessori parent and a grandparent. I want to mention that. Right now, in 2013, I started Ananda Montessori, which is a place where children can be together with adults and learn together. I think of it as a living practice of Montessori because the adults, whether they are parents or grandparents or caregivers, they're immersed in the practice, which is the practice of observation and the practice of observing what we see, and also our inner observation. I've also been attending births since 1986 in hospitals, and presently always attending home births. So that's my practice as well in Montessori, is attending births, teaching childbirth class, and on that level. So I'm a consultant and a teacher trainer. I do that as well. But I love to work with parents. It's my heart. It touches my heart so much. That's kind of the journey that I've been on, and I continue to be on, because Montessori, to me, at least, is a practice of life, and so it's ongoing, and it deepens.
Beautiful start, and it continues to support not just your family, but families who really need the support. Edward Cuevas, I think, has the "nobody was born a parent," parent education he talks about, and it's so true. We get into education because we see a deficit or we need something, and Ananda is a beautiful place from what I've seen from the information you shared online, that I get to watch the beautiful videos of children growing and learning And I'm so grateful that you will be here talking about a variety of topics relating to a Montessori classroom to support parents and caregivers alike, maybe the classroom guide or the leader. So starting off, discernment, we know Maria Montessori speaks about the prepared adults and preparing the environment for the young person to learn without obstacles. So what are some signals or clues that could help us discern whether we, the guide, the adults in the classroom or at home, meeting the needs of the child versus our own goals or, ideas that we have that we bring into the classroom?
It's a wonderful contemplation. Discernment, I was looking up over time different definitions of discernment, and inner guidance is one. But at one time, I found one definition which resonates with me very deeply and connects to Montessori, and that is to know what is yet unknown, which reminds me of her speaking about to see the child who is not yet there. And I expand that out to see myself as I am not yet here, those aspects of all of us, and see the adults who's not yet there, that vision. But discernment for me it is a practice. We all come into that in different ways. Discernment to me also is something alive. It's not stagnant. It's just like Montessori is a verb, it's about light. So discernment is, to me, sitting with something I call whole body listening with my senses, as she spoke about with observation, to bring procuring our senses to come from that level of vision and really of listening, to consider before any movement that I make, anything that I say. Thoughts will come in, and even the thoughts that come in, to sit with those a little bit. The other part of discernment to me is intentions, which is very different than motivations. I feel motivations can be more externally or more connected to our past or our future or what might happen. And intention, my experience of it is to be in more presence. So if I'm with a child or with guiding parents and children, which I have the opportunity to do, and we talk about this practice and quite a bit at Ananda, if we're considering a movement or we're considering to come and to offer something to a child, one question I ask is, will this add anything to this child's experience, or might it take something away? Is it a movement of inserting myself into their own experience they're having because of maybe my thoughts that I can help, or I know something more than the child does? All of those aspects come into it. The other thing I'll say is to, at least for me, part of the practice is to bring some distance between myself and the other person so that I'm giving them that autonomy. And I have my autonomy as well, so that I can sit and consider and sense and feel, and to give space for the unknown. Because sometimes, for me anyway, and I've seen this in guides and adults, and I fully understand it, we may notice something that is happening with a child, or we think we know, and that if we pause and we wait just a little bit longer, the child reveals to us what's really happening. And if we come in too soon, we won't be able to see that. And it could be around, I'll just give a quick example with the young children, maybe toddler age, where they're in the practice in themselves of pouring things out. For adults, sometimes that can get maybe even annoying. What are they doing that they have it and then they pour it out and then they bring it up and they pour it out? But if you sit back and you watch, you might notice that even really with small objects, that let's say if anything that's small and it's going out or whatever the size, if we give space to them, they may then come to those objects and they pick them up and they put them back in. And they pick them up and they put them back in. One at a time. So isn't it amazing that perhaps that child in their wisdom created this experience to have that practice? That's one example, I would say.
It's a beautiful example. And often that waiting and taking a pause can be a skill that we learn over time. And Maria Montessori speaks about observation. It's necessary for us to be patient and wait and observe the child and wait for the right moment before we begin teaching. So, in terms of guiding. So how do you decide when is the right moment to join these little ones and when it's time for us to step back?
That's a wonderful question. Well, the first thing I'll say is around observation. We're observing all the time. It's natural. I'm observing you, you're observing me. But there's a preparation to observe that is part of observation. I don't hear about that a lot, but it's very important and it speaks to your question. So coming in, whatever way it is for us, that we might come into, I think of it as the seat of the observer, to ground and to breathe and to be as present as we can. And I work with my families, the adults, about observation. They practice this at Ananda and they practice this at home. Just taking a few deep breaths, closing your eyes for a moment, and then opening your eyes. What you saw before you closed your eyes is often very different from when you open your eyes of the child. And really, it begins within us. So something shifts within us. That would be the first thing that I always say about observation. You've talked often about this. I feel when we are observing a child or children, that our intention is to not interrupt them, to not disturb. So anything that I might do in being with another person, if it's going to disturb them, that is a clue to me that it's not a time to come in. So they could be doing something wrong of what is right and wrong. Who knows that? The child knows that. And we can wait and we can see that. So I always wait. If I do come in, if a child is needing a little guidance, the way that anyone moves, I feel is very important. To not come from behind to a child, to come not straight on to a child, to come to the side always, and to kneel down. And what the way that I experience guidance is that I'm merging in for a moment and offering some guidance, and then I move myself out. It's kind of like a dance, coming in and coming out. Whether it could be guidance around someone is working with the material, spooning, or some mathematical material, and anything at all, or it could be social, something that is being expressed between children and they're learning. I want to come in to not disturb, but to offer guidance. And what I train teachers to is to sit to the floor. If you're outside, sit to the ground. Do that, and that will help you quite a bit. So if you're not, clues to me, if I'm ever standing over a child, if I am over top at all, that is my stuff. To me, at Ananda, with the adults there, when there's activation in us, maybe our own being parented, rising up, that's a clue to me that everything's working well. Because that has to happen, I feel. I don't want anyone to be harmed. I don't wish that the materials are harmed or the environment. But other than those things, I'm really observing to see what the child is showing me. And then you get a lot of information around what to prepare and all of that. I learned this from my mentor way back. Whatever I'm questioning what to do, step back and sit down and observe.
It's especially that stepping back in the spiritual, the growth that we all go through, the way we were parented. And often I remember as a new guide or a new administrator, I wanted to hurry that process. It's so organic. It takes time, awareness, and we get there eventually. And stepping back now and closing my eyes, it makes a profound difference if I pause or step back instead of just intervening for my own thoughts. So this was really, really clear and beautiful to follow. And Maria Montessori speaks about, the child can develop fully by means of experience in his environment, right? And we call this work. So children are working in this environment. So when they're working on their activity, what are some of the ways we know that now we're being invited to be part of the child's time, the space where we could give maybe a new lesson or interact? And I'm sure there is body language or there's something that we have to be aware of. Could you speak to that?
Well, I would begin by coming back to that sensing within us. I work even in pregnancy. I'm having connection with the child. So if I'm touching the woman's belly and I always silently ask permission even to the child to do that, then my hand is there and often will feel a part come up and touch me or maybe kick me, those kinds of things. But we can silently ask for that permission. With infants, really with any children, and really with any adults. I am waiting for their eyes to turn to me. That is like an invitation, and it's also them coming out of their experience. So I've been in my experience, and then with infants, I feel it as like, oh, hello, I see you. And then I may come down to their level and just move slowly over and look into their eyes and be with them. And it could just be in silence. But the eyes meaning mine, because if I come in, it's very startling for us, even if someone comes and we don't see them. It can be scary. For the young child, it's especially so because there are no filters in that early life of the unconscious mind, and they're extremely sensitive. So I want to give great patience and have trust and faith and wait for those eyes to look upon me. Once, what I've noticed is because I have children for quite a few years, they stay. And when I had a school up through 8th grade, I had some children for 10 years and knew them really well. You get to know the children. That's one aspect of Montessori that I so treasure, is how deeply, but it begins here again in knowing ourselves and having the willingness even to be seen by the child. If we have the willingness to be seen by the child, that is also the invitation within us. Then as the children, the toddler age, that age, they come to us. They'll come to us. So I always say to the adults, let the child come to you. See what happens when you let the child, because it could be any child at Ananda, because like tomorrow I'll have 14 children ages 3 to 6, and I may have 10 adults there. So the children are very comfortable around all of the adults. They may go to anyone if they are in need of something. And then I'm observing everything. And if I notice that a child may be looking for something or it's not out in the environment, then I will come and address that. But the child coming to us is another part of it that I feel many times in myself, in my learning, I would jump to, well, I think I know what somebody wants. So I'll get there first. And it's very different when we wait for the child. We don't have to wait, but just that allowance of freedom that they come to us.
There's a beautiful joy in that because now they're able to use their will and request information or whatever they might need. And that opportunity, it's such a gift. And we often become aware of it when we're in the classroom for a while. I want to speak about welcoming children into our home. We know that they learn by doing. They observe everything in their environment. So, what are some of the things that caregivers at home can do to prepare the environment or the home to receive the young person?
And that is a wonderful contemplation again. I would say for me, I believe it begins in pregnancy, in thinking about, and sometimes during pregnancy, well, we're in our present moment of our bodies and we're in collaboration with the unborn child. When I'm working with the childbirth classes, we talk a lot around looking forward to the home environment and just sort of talking about and me listening to their words around how might you get your home ready for your child. And often this is cultural, I think, here anyway, the idea of child proofing. It's almost like a being is coming that's not of us. And to prepare for that person to come, when for the child, this is their home. And there's a little shifting that can be quite large when we begin to consider that aspect, that this is the home of the child. This is our home of the family. And to honor that wherever you birth, to honor that right from the beginning, that we're all here together and we are in collaboration together is one part that I've seen to be helpful. Another thing when I'm consulting with families is and you've probably heard this and even done this, whatever age our child is, and if our bodies are up to it, if we have an infant, to lie back on the floor and to go room from room and just see what do I see? What do I see? What do I feel beneath me? What does the floor feel like? What does the carpet feel like? What do I see when I turn my head? And that if children are beginning to move, crawling, however they're moving, to travel through as your child as much as you can and see what they see at their level. And that can be quite revealing. You might see a lot of cords hanging down or things that haven't been dusted. And to consider that children respond to beauty, they respond to order, they respond to simplicity. And what might happen if we just made things lower for their level? Because I sometimes call that the silent journey of the home. Maybe this is your first child and you haven't considered this, but you're going through that and you're noticing, oh, I'm having to look up everywhere to see things and how my body feels when I have to do that, how that might feel for a child. So to bring things low, to consider as the child, we can't make anyone be independent. That's process centered. Yet we can prepare the environment in ways that are welcoming to the child, from the entryway to the living area, to the kitchen, to whatever rooms we have in the home, that again, with the mindset of this is the house of the child as much as it is ours. How can we? Sometimes I'll say, even at Ananda, I'll go in and I'll look and think, what am I doing that the child could do for themselves? So then I'm having a need to adjust or prepare the environment differently. And that would be true of the home as well. In each space, and it changes as children get older and they get taller and they're moving and all of those things. And to allow for as much as we can in the home. We all have the different homes that we live in, but for freedom of movement and exploration so that it is safe. And I mentioned order, which is a sensitivity, very strong in the child, to have beauty. And the other thing is purpose, to have, for example, in the once a child, a newborn may be in our room of rest, let's say, but if they aren't in their room of rest, that space is for that purpose, that there aren't a lot of things in there and materials are low, the shelving is low, all of those aspects that create calmness. There's just a sense of calmness, and including the child as much as they want to be included, as you said earlier. They're watching us, they want to join, they want to contribute and belong. And so to create a space of belonging that's kind of the essence of it, is create a space of belonging.
Yes, indeed. So in Montessori training, we speak so much about the prepared environment of the womb and preparing the environment in the home where the newborn ends up going. And you just spoke about the importance of order, part of the sensitive periods. 4. One is the order. Second is language. And then movement. Can we talk about language and movement for this newborn who is now in a home? Actually, there's a 3-part. I want to understand for new parents, what does a prepared environment look like? What does it sound like? What is the role of an adult?
Well, again, I'll start in pregnancy. I always have to, because any women, any co-parent understands that we are in relationship with our child before birth, and we can communicate and connect with our child in many different ways. And one is through language, is through our senses, through touch, through language, through our movement. So when you talk about movement, we are moving with our child even in pregnancy. There's that beginning of that. And the child that is unborn, I feel, is in a sensitive period of order, among other things. Because if we think of order as a way to kind of orient, where am I in this place? Well, the child in pregnancy is moving about in the uterus and sort of mapping their environment, the first prepared environment, and finding out, where am I in relationship from me to what's around me, what's surrounding me. And then after birth in the home, those in Montessori we sometimes call these reference points, but I call them baby memories, which are the heartbeat of the mother, the vibration, her scent, the scent of the co-parent, the movement of her. Then birth happens. Those baby memories are so essential. Maria Montessori wrote quite extensively about that. And in the book, The Understanding the Human Being, another book that's very helpful, talks about this. But they help with the transition from being in pregnancy to being, I call it earth side. So I'm born, but right away I'm looking for those. All I know is what I had. So then I have to find that. And one thing that is interesting, this is universally, when babies are born, if a mother brings the child up to her, she will bring the child up here to her left side. And that is because that's where the baby can hear the heart the best and feel her vibration the strongest, and then take in her smell and her touch. And she's taking in for the first time, touching her child. They're just in resonance together. So beautiful. So they are coming into adaptation and transition of the mother, no matter how many times a woman has birthed, each time she's coming into mothering. And then the child is coming into being a son or a daughter. So those baby memories, and I would say the mother memories, they assist tremendously in that transition. And then in the home environment, again, I think always back to the environment, the first prepared environment where there was, when we were inside our mothers, there was dim lighting and we could see a bit. There was natural sound, we'll say. And in the home, there's the sound of our home. So it's not like you have to walk around and be super quiet because they know their home sounds, but not having background noise, loud noise, startling, those kinds of things. And with language, we've been maybe in pregnancy, singing to the child, telling stories, any language. That's the love of the child, to hear the voice of the parent. Doesn't matter what we're saying. It matters more how we are in ourselves, perhaps, when we're speaking. But that expressive language is another one of those links that helps the child to feel safe and secure, and there's trust being processed, all of that. With newborns, to speak to the child as a full personality, to talk about when I think of whatever's happening in the home, if it's an area of self-care where the child is breastfeeding or having a bottle, where there's freedom of movement, which is a need in the child, sleep, another area. All of those areas bring opportunities for relationship with our child, so that whatever is happening, we can consider that this is not something to do, but it is a way to be with my child. So, for example, with self-care, to be very naturally speaking in conversation with the newborn about what's happening with dressing, so that you're talking about maybe something's coming over your head and it's coming down, and then the sleeve or the arms coming through. And very soon, it's so early with newborns that's happening, they will begin to move their arm a little bit when they hear the, so they're starting to collaborate. I mean, they are in collaboration, but they begin to have that movement. So speaking about what's happening, I feel, is very important, and it's with the sensitive period to order. Again, orienting, where am I in this place? What is happening here? I sometimes feel like we become the compass. We can become the compass for the child. Not, we don't do it for the child, but that moves through us. And it's very essential. With movement, all of these things I like to think about with sleep too. When we were inside our mothers, we slept on our own. We woke up, we slept, we woke up, we moved freely. We already did all those things. They're natural within us. So that's a helpful thing to remember too. And I often feel, I remember this, I have 2 sons and now grandchildren, but I often remember with, especially my first child, how I realized all of a sudden that he was teaching me more than I didn't know anything. But if I could really, I would ask him, please show me, and begin to observe in those things. But children remembering that he could sleep on his own and he moved on his own and creating spaces for freedom of movement, which is a need in the human being.
That's beautiful, laid out the prepared environment and some of the sensitive periods. Pamela, as school leaders, we have parents. This bedtime routine comes to mind. It can be a very challenging thing because the way we've been parented or what we're seeing in the world. What are some of the steps that we use in a Montessori environment for infant or toddler for nap time? How do they know it's time to sleep?
The families all have their own personal choices on how they are sleeping with the child, the infant in the room. Most families I know will choose that in the early life of the child. So that might be what's happening. In Montessori, you often hear about the floor bed, which is not, it can be something as simple as a nice, low, natural mattress on the floor, and to have a space that is safe and where it is not, there's not a lot in it. And there's many ways that we can prepare that space. One thing that I'll add early on is the topponcino, the quilted blanket or the secure quilt, sometimes is known as it. That is something that is a universal material. It's not just part of Montessori, but I had that with my first son, and those are transitional materials, let's say, again, from being in pregnancy, whatever it is. It could be that's something that's a little quilt that a newborn can lie on. But during pregnancy, the parents can sleep with that and have their scent upon that. And it becomes part of then security for the child after birth. So for sleep early on, that material, it can be a little quilt. Doesn't have to be, it can be even something to secure to hold the baby. So the child would sleep on that. It's the same wherever I sleep. It's the same. So when I go somewhere, this is the same. And that I've noticed over time can help with the early resting. And then the family, the mother, the co-parent, the siblings all becoming aware when the newborn is tired. We can come into the observation of when they're tired and respond to that so that we can assist the child in resting. If we go past that time, we'll hear about it. We will hear about it. So it's a teaching, isn't it? Our lives may be getting too busy sometimes, and then the sleep pattern all of a sudden starts to change. And I'll often say to families, well, can you just sit back a little bit and think about your life, and is anything different at all? Because the child's so sensitive, that can make a difference. Helping a child early on, they can fall asleep on their own, but in early life, the child needs to be with the mother. So being with the mother, and maybe the child's falling asleep on the mother or the other adult, and then we can, if possible, then transition the child onto that, whatever area is familiar to them. So we begin to do that and allow them the freedom to sleep on their own. If we want, everyone is comfortable in different ways. And I'm not saying at all having children in different rooms and that kind of thing early on. So that's with newborn. As children get older, being collaborative with the child. And, in positive discipline, how we talk about this is part of the sensitive period of ordered I call it, rather than routine, I think of the rhythm of the day, the rhythm of the biological rhythm of the child, and having rhythm that is familiar for them, like in the evening of this happens, then this happens, then this happens, then this happens, and then sleeping happens. And we have to do that. We can't wait for the child to all of a sudden be in command of that. We have to give them that security of that, those routines. And then if they're a little older, there are processes that to where you work in collaboration with the child to create those routines and maybe even a chart and stuff like that. The first step I feel in that regard is for the adults to be the ones to be observing, to learn, and then to create prepare an environment that is supporting whatever those needs are in language and sleep too.
The prepared environment is constant. And what you just said is, so it's always evolving as children are growing, and through observation, we can adjust and support the young person. My big key takeaway here is that we have to come up with that through observation when they're very young. And later we can do the rhythm charts or routine charts, because now they can collaborate. And now we're moving into the primary classroom, or we call it 3 to 6 or CASA, an environment where children transition first from the pregnancy to now they're born, they're infant, then toddler. And then CASA is for 3 to 6-year-olds. And as we speak about CASA, how do we know? Because the guidelines are different per states and countries. How do we transition children? When do we know they're ready from toddler to move into the primary classroom? Often we all believe that when they get to primary, all of a sudden they're bigger or they're with different peers and they're going to learn differently. However, there is child development to keep in mind, and I know that you're going to guide us there.
For me anyway, it doesn't have to do with the age of the child. It has to do with their readiness that is being revealed, so someone who is age 2.5 could be moving into an awareness or the inner drive within themselves, which is more intentional. With that intention, having the ability as much as they can to choose and to play or work with the material, and then to come into the process of returning that. I mean, these are not rules. I never use the word rule, but I'm just observing that in the child. And so that's their own inner work in that way. But then there's the social aspect too. They begin to expand in their awareness of others. Just a little bit ago, you might not have seen. They may have been more like parallel play or more just playing on their own. Although children play together as infants, they do. It's different. But again, what you're saying is exactly true. There's no magic thing that happens when a child turns 3. There could be someone who's lived 3 years and yet doesn't quite have that readiness or that sensitivity to move into the CASA. And I would never want to push someone. I would never want to do that. But moving from that intention, which is within the child and their own, we call it the inner guide of the child that relates, and then all the observation of fine motor and gross motor and the holistically what's happening within the child. And yet when they do come into that, there is something that shifts, and it's quite remarkable. All times are remarkable, but there's a different consciousness that's within the child. They're moving with a new consciousness and within themselves. And, but we don't want to push that, and we don't want to make rules around that. You have to be able to do this and this, and their process. All of the things that we might be looking for in a child, they're in the process of that. And then if they come into the 3 to 6 environment, that community, that prepared environment supports that process. That's the other thing that I will observe.
We spent almost an hour having a conversation about various topics, and I hope that others will find a few more tools, a few answers to the questions they may have had. And it's, of course, not enough time. There's so much to discuss. And temperament of a child, how every child, even the same age, is so unique and beautiful. We talk about observation, observation, and observation. And it's not just looking, but really, truly, deeply understanding these beings, ourselves, the parents. We're observing everything, the home environment, the school environment, because it truly takes it all. Like, it takes a village for sure in developing these beautiful beings to their natural way, whatever their normal state will be. And that's the gift of it, that Montessori environments, we help children grow into or get into the path of whomever they're meant to be. Thank you for having this conversation with me, and your dedication to children and adults alike, so that we could have beautiful environments that are prepared for young ones to grow. Today, we are recording this podcast, and it is Election Day in the United States. And with this conversation, I know that children are going to have an outstanding way to create the world a beautiful place. Thank you, Pamela, for joining today.
Thank you so much, Yogi, for inviting me. It was very, very nice and wonderful to be with you.
Oh, my pleasure. And for listeners, if you had questions about floor beds or anything we spoke about, there is a podcast with Madhuri Prasad and Jean-Marie Pennell where we speak about specific items in a home or in a Montessori environment if you're interested. Thank you for listening.